It's week 3 of the NFL season. Welcome to Pro Football Now. We're starting the show as we do every week. We are emptying the reporter's notebook with Albert Breer and Jenny Vrentis, both of the MMQB. We have to start with the Giants. And Jenny, you witnessed this in person. The offensive futility of this team, though, it is a trend. They've gone 8 straight games failing to score at least 20 points. That's not asking for much. Same team, similar team, same personnel, same front office, and same results here. What's the feeling around the Giants?
I thought the big thing that came out of yesterday night's game was afterward, Ben McAdoo kind of publicly called out Eli Manning, and it sort of stood in contrast to some of his other comments. You know, he was asked about Brandon Marshall's drop, and he said it was a long season. Asked about Eric Flowers, the left tackle, said, you know, you don't want to just single out one guy. But with Eli, you know, there was the delay of game right on the goal line that backed them up and forced them to kick the field goal. He called it sloppy quarterback play. You expect your veteran to get the ball off there. He sort of third down, he said Eli kind of picked short, throwing short of the sticks. And then on another play, the interception, when they gave the ball right back after the defense forced a fumble, he said he, you know, should have gone to a different read. So very specific things to call out your 14-year veteran quarterback for. Now, head coaches rarely say anything without plans, so he clearly had an intention. I don't think he was just being honest or just venting or anything like that. It was clearly a message. We don't know exactly what that message was. I think it's perhaps that, you know, he wanted Eli to be accountable, hold your quarterback accountable, and hold everyone else below him accountable, but it was still surprising.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point there, the accountability thing. I think players pay attention. Like when a coach stands up there after a game, he's not really talking to us, he's talking through us to his locker room. And I think one of the messages there is if Eli's not safe, then no one's safe. And everybody's got to be accountable for what happened. What really stuck out to me there were 2 things that really going into last year that you saw as potential problems for the Giants that they were able to manage through the year. The first one was obvious, the offensive line. They were able to manage that last year. It's been a big problem through 2 games. Eric Flowers looks like he's completely incapable of playing left tackle, and they've got issues elsewhere. And then the other issue going into last year that they were able to manage because they had great health was the defensive depth. You know, they brought in Jackrabbit Jenkins, they brought in Snacks Harrison, they brought in Olivier Vernon, and it fixed a lot of their issues defensively, but there were still questions about whether or not they had the depth to handle it or the depth to withstand injuries, any sort of attrition. And last year they were tremendously healthy. Last night you see Jenkins doesn't play. What happens? Well, there's a long touchdown to Jones on Eli Apple. And so some of the issues I think you had as far as defensive depth go came up again last night. So I think these are issues that aren't new for the Giants. They're just issues they were able to handle last year and manage last year. And I don't think it's any shock that they're manifesting themselves now.
Eli and Ben McAdoo seemed to work so well when he was the offensive coordinator. Now he is the head coach in his 2nd season. 4 times in history, we've seen a coach take over at the head spot, go to the playoffs, and then be fired the very next year. Jenny, you know this organization well. Do you think Ben McAdoo's on the hot seat?
The Giants are one of the most patient organizations. I mean, they probably waited too long with Coughlin. Of course, he had 2 Super Bowls, but they gave him, you know, a long string. I don't think they're a quick trigger organization. We're still 2 games into the season. You know, the 07 Giants team was honored at halftime last night. They started 0-2. But the negative of that is that in the Giants, ever since that happened, that's become a flashpoint. Oh, if we get off to a slow start, we can just fix it right away. So there's clearly issues that they have to deal with. I think there's some clock management issues we've seen McAdoo having. There's some questions about the scheme, how well it's really working for the players. But it's still early, and I think another huge factor is that Odell Beckham is still banged up, and a lot of their offense has been let Beckham just create something. So if you have offensive line issues, if you're having run game issues, he'll just be a spark, make a play, and keep a drive going, and they have not had that this year.
It's hard for me to envision a scenario where McAdoo would be in trouble, but I do think this is a big gut check for the organization in general, having to go into Philadelphia, and now you're 0-2, your season's pretty much on the line. And you look at their offseason, and you start to wonder if they're equipped for this, if they're equipped to deal with adversity, because you see the way that they handled it at the end of last year with the whole boat thing, and then the week leading up to the Green Bay game, and then what happened with the receivers who were involved in the boat incident in the Green Bay game, and then the whole Odell Beckham circus over the course of the offseason program. I think what's interesting about the way that they've handled all of that is that I feel like they were more permissive with Beckham than they've been with any other player that I've seen. I can't remember that organization being as just giving a player the kind of allowances that they gave Odell Beckham over the course of this offseason. And you wonder if that kind of metastasizes into a bigger problem. We talked about accountability, right? Well, I know that there are some people who've been in that organization who question whether or not Odell Beckham was truly being held accountable over the course of this offseason. And maybe what we saw last night with, Ben McAdoo sort of going for the head of the snake and going and saying, Eli Manning's part of the problem too. You wonder if there's a message where he feels like he needs to reestablish some sort of accountability inside that organization. I think it's a really interesting week for them. And I think it's the sort of week where you look at it and you say, if they're 0-3 coming out of Philadelphia, are we going to start to see some of the fireworks that we saw at the end of last year?
And it might be a risky maneuver for Ben McAdoo in terms of trying to keep that locker room when you call out a two-time Super Bowl champion like Eli Manning. Okay, 8 other teams, though, in the league are off to an 0-2 start. I'll read them for you guys. In the AFC, the Jets, the Browns, the Bengals, Colts, and Chargers. In the NFC, the Bears, Saints, the 49ers, the aforementioned Giants. That brings our total to 9. You mentioned that the 07 team for the Giants started 0-2, and, of course, they made it to the Super Bowl. At least one team that started 0-2 over the last 4 years has gone on to the playoffs. So you hear all these statistics about the sky is falling if you start 0-2. Recent history would tell you that you still have a pretty good shot. Albert, of those 0-2 teams, who do you believe in the most?
Talent-wise, I like the Chargers. I just think that they have built a solid nucleus over the last few years, and they've got talent at every level of the roster. They're going to be adding pieces as we go on, too. Denzel Perriman presumably will come back from injury on the defensive side. They're hoping they'll get Mike Williams back, the rookie receiver from Clemson, on the offensive side. And so it's a team that should, on paper, get better as the year goes on. And remember, they've had horrible injury luck the last couple of years. I mean, you could argue that injuries are what got Mike McCoy fired there. And so I think you've got the core of talent in place there and a veteran quarterback who's been through this before in Philip Rivers, where I could see them making a run. The problem that they're going to run into is their division. The Chiefs look like the best team in football. The Broncos look like they're not far behind. And the Raiders may have been the AFC favorite outside of New England going into the season. And so you could have 3 of the 5 best teams in the AFC right there in your division if you're the Chargers. So that makes your road more difficult to climb up off the mat from 0-2, but I think talent-wise they're the most equipped team to do it.
I would agree with that. I mean, 2 field goals away from being 2-0, yep. Right? It could very easily have gone the other way. They went to Denver in week 1 and then the home game against the Dolphins. The other team to throw in there, I guess, is the Bengals. I mean, they made the offensive coordinator change. Sometimes that shakes things up. They have a lot of talent as well. And so, perhaps, players on offense, we talked about accountability with the Giants. Maybe that's a factor. Maybe there's some scheme things, confidence for Andy Dalton, allowing him to air the ball out a little bit more. He seemed like a very hamstrung quarterback the first 2 weeks. So that would be the other team that, other than the Chargers.
Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. A lot to unpack here. We know that Jason Garrett is going to be speaking to Zeke Elliott about the lack of effort on a couple plays against the Broncos when they were blown out. We know also Dak Prescott dealing with an ankle injury. I mean, how bad are things in Dallas right now, Albert?
Well, I think one thing that haunts them here is their past again, and that, if you can go all the way back to, the post-Aikman, the beginning of the post-Aikman era, like the beginning of this century, and look at the history. 2007, they're 13-3, the number 1 seed in the NFC. They come back the next year. They miss the playoffs. Everything blew up. Pac-Man Jones, Tank Johnson, T.O. the next year. They come back the year after that, 2009. They win their division, win the first playoff game since the Aikman, Smith, Irvin era. The next year, what happens, they're so bad at the beginning of the year that they fire Wade Phillips halfway through the season. And then more recently in 2014, they go 12-4. They're a catch/non-catch away from getting the NFC title game, the Des Bryant play in Green Bay. Well, what do? They get close. Jerry feels like they're close. They go out and they sign Greg Hardy. Romo gets hurt. Everything blows up in 2015. And so there's this recent history that they haven't dealt with prosperity particularly well. I really know that's something that Garrett and the coaching staff have worked on, and they feel like the core of that team, they feel like they do have the right kinds of guys in the locker room. But you see the stuff from Zeke, and you see, now Dak's going into his second year, so he's got to deal with a little bit of a different dynamic. They've got a couple moving pieces on the offensive line, which was such an overwhelming strength for them last year, and you take 5 starters out of the defense, and so they're relying on a lot of young guys on that side of the ball. Like you said, even for the Cowboys, there's just a lot going on there. And this is going to be a difficult task for Jason now to pull them out of this. Now, the good news is they can look past that Denver game, look 1 week earlier and see we dominated the New York Giants at home. So it's not like it's not like they're coming off, 2 bad weeks. But there is certainly a lot to work through there.
And I think the question was always going to be with those young offensive stars, how did it look in year 2? And a lot of times with rookie quarterbacks, that's such a huge jump from 1 to 2 because A, the rest of the league has tape on you and they know how to game plan against you. And B, there's always a tendency, year 1 you're just trying to get through things. Year 2 you want to try to open up the offense. That doesn't always go well. That jump doesn't always, sometimes the player continues to take off and sometimes they hit some speed bumps. So it was interesting to see the Broncos defenders say, if we key in on Elliott, we have to make Prescott beat us, and he wasn't able to do that in Denver. And so now that's the blueprint for the rest of the opponents to kind of follow that plan.
And the interesting thing about it too, Jenny, they didn't play from behind a lot last year. And that changes things for a quarterback. When you start to fall behind, okay, now we're down 10 points, we're down 14 points. Last year, through Elliott in the running game, they were able to really control the pace of games and manage situations. So Dak wasn't in 3rd and 9 a lot. Dak wasn't down by 14 points very much. That's a different sort of dynamic. And so Denver being able to jump to the lead on them now, all of a sudden, more's on Dak's shoulders. Now, he handled it well in the playoffs last year, but having to do that on a week-to-week basis is a lot different than being in a spot where they were last year, where you've got the number 1 running game in the NFL, you've got a solid defense, and you're able to manage games the way the Cowboys were able to manage them.
Jenny and Albert, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, let's take a look at one of the more underrated storylines this week. It's our friends from Pro Football Focus with their, well, actually.
I'm Steve Palazzolo.
And I'm Sam Monson. We are Pro Football Focus, and this is Well Actually.
Sam, everybody likes to judge quarterbacks by wins and losses, and 2 quarterbacks we always get questions about, Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints and Philip Rivers of the Los Angeles Chargers. Both quarterbacks have led teams that haven't had great records in recent years, and they've both started 0-2. So what's wrong with Brees? What's wrong with Rivers? Well, actually, we're here to tell you that both players are playing just fine.
Yeah, nothing is wrong with those 2 guys. And with Drew Brees, you don't need to go very far to find that out. The box score statistics look great. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, passer rating of over 100. But if anything, the advanced PFF numbers look even better for him. 7 big-time throws, your favorite statistic.
Love the BTT.
Leads the league. Passer rating of 136.6 against the blitz. Why is anybody blitzing this guy? But Philip Rivers has some great numbers as well. 94.4 his passer rating when under pressure. 3 touchdowns when the heat has been applied. But when you keep him clean in the pocket, he has the number 2 adjusted completion percentage as well. So those 2 guys are both playing fantastic in the pocket. It's everything else around them that's been the issue.
Yeah, with Brees in particular, I just think about he's playing with such a small margin for error with that defense. They were down 20-0 in the first quarter against the New England Patriots. That defense has allowed 80% completions in their first 2 games, over 10 yards per attempt, and a passer rating of 141.4. That defense just can't stop anybody. So Brees is already sitting there counting possessions. How do we get back in this game? I can't miss any throws, but he's still playing great. You mentioned the big-time throws. He has been very accurate. With Rivers, not only did he face so much pressure last season, one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL, this year already on the bad end of a lot of the bad Chargers luck that we've seen in recent years. They drop a pick 6 early in the Denver Broncos game that would have changed that game. They had a blocked field goal in that game. He puts them in position for a game-winning field goal against the Miami Dolphins. That one gets missed as well. Again, both guys playing pretty well, but not showing up in the record.
Yeah, Drew Brees is our number 2 rated quarterback, number 1 rated quarterback with the PFF grades if you discount Sam Bradford, who's only played 1 game against that New Orleans defense.
Not fair. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got some quarterbacks playing just okay, and their teams are sitting at 2-0.
Guys like Cam Newton, Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Flacco, but it's far more down to the supporting cast around them. Cam Newton has missed wide open touchdown throws in both those first 2 games. Christian McCaffrey in the flats this week. But the Panthers defense has given up 6 points total across 2 games. The Baltimore Ravens, their defense has allowed 10 points across those 2 games all this week against the Browns. They pitched a shutout week 1. And Ben Roethlisberger has had to go up against the Cleveland Browns and the Minnesota Vikings without Sam Bradford this week. So those 3 guys, are not playing nearly as well as Drew Brees and Philip Rivers, but there's so much more around them helping them out.
We know not to judge quarterbacks solely by wins and losses, but especially early in the season. So when you're looking at Drew Brees and Philip Rivers, despite the 0-2 records, they're still playing extremely well, and it's going to be on the Saints and Chargers to get some better pieces around them to take advantage of their strong quarterback play.
Hey, welcome to the Executive Suite. I'm Corey Parson, the Fantasy Executive, with your fantasy football market share right here on PFN. Now, let's hop into the Tennessee Titans backfield. Tennessee Titan running back DeMarco Murray dealing with hamstring issues early in the season, and it's really affecting his play. So far this year, on 21 carries, he's only averaging 3.3 yards a pop. That's not DeMarco Murray's game. The other running back in Tennessee, second-year player Derrick Henry, in 20 carries this season, he's averaging 5.9 yards a pop. In week 2, he averaged over 6 yards a carry. Right now, it looks like Derrick Henry is in good position to Wally Pipp, one Mr. DeMarco Murray, in that Titans running game. In week 1, we saw Marcus Mariota and the Titans throw the football 41 times in a loss. In week 2, in the victory, they only threw the football 27 times. If Derrick Henry can keep this rolling, that backfield could very well be his. I would advise fantasy owners to buy now. Another unit we want to look at is the Philadelphia Eagles passing game. Right now, Carson Wentz is top 3 in fantasy points amongst quarterbacks. He's top 3 in attempts, he's top 3 in attempts per game, he's top 3 in passing yards, and he's top 3 in yards per game. Carson Wentz is putting together a truly dynamic season thus far, and the reason why is because of volume. Sometime in fantasy football, volume trumps efficiency, and that's what Carson Wentz is getting done right now. He's throwing the football more than anybody else, and he's targeting his top targets, guys like Zach Ertz. He's top 3 in targets for tight ends with 18 on the season. Alshon Jeffrey, not only is he getting it done with targets, 20 so far on the season, he's also leading the NFL in air yards. The Philadelphia Eagles are also bottom 10 in the league in rushing attempts. As long as this kind of volume continues, expect good things from the Philadelphia Eagles passing game. Even Torrey Smith is getting in on the act. He's a viable fantasy option in 2017. So far on the season, Torrey Smith has 286 air yards. That's a direct result of the volume of the passing game in Philadelphia. Remember, no running back there. Torrey Smith is a guy that you can invest in finally in fantasy football. And now for our Symmetra Rising Star of Week 3. It is Denver Bronco quarterback Trevor Siemian. So far this season, he is the second highest scoring fantasy quarterback. New offensive coordinator Mike McCoy prefers a more aggressive passing game, and not only has one Mr. Siemian been extremely efficient, he's also getting the ball to the correct targets. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders. Trevor Siemian is a starter in each and every 12-team fantasy league moving forward in 2017. With the Executive Suite here on PFN, I'm Corey Parson, the Fantasy Executive.
All right, thanks, Corey. This is Last Call, and look, the Falcons dealt with this the whole offseason, and you saw it because it was impossible to miss it. 28-3, 28-3, 28-3. And riding shotgun to all of that taunting was the idea that the mother of all Super Bowl hangovers was coming as a result of the mother of all Super Bowl collapses. 2 weeks in, not so much. And the Falcons have handled all of this so well because they haven't run from it. As recently as last week, players all the way up the chain to Matt Ryan were speaking freely about overcoming the past. There wasn't a ceremonial burial of a football or an embargo on talking about 2016. Instead, the players and coaches have hit what they had coming right between the eyes. And the reason why is simple. They did what few NFL teams have the stomach to do when things go sideways. Behind the GM they've stuck with for a decade and a head coach they've invested in, they believed in their course and stuck to it. You can start, too, with one thing that actually changed. Atlanta handled its biggest off-season defection, that of Kyle Shanahan to the Niners, by asking every candidate they interviewed, can you run his offense? In essence, screaming to the players, stay the course. And the man Quinn found, Steve Sarkisian, has background with Pete Carroll, another sign of how Atlanta was building on the program, not tearing it down. So where the pilot was different, the script wasn't, and at least on Sunday, neither was the result. Matt Ryan and company rolled up 257 yards and 24 points in the first half alone against Green Bay. If they look unaffected by all the noise, that makes sense too, because it had been impressed on the players that they'd been through a smaller version of this before. During Dan Quinn's first Falcons season, the team started 6-1, and that evaporated into an 8-8 finish, and that loomed over the 2016 offseason. The same way 28-3 will come up this year every time Atlanta has a lead. The 2-7 meltdown served as a caveat to every early season win they had last year. And the Falcons were able to plow through all of that on their way to the Super Bowl. Now look, we don't know yet whether or not the Falcons are going to be where they were last year, with a shot to win the franchise's first world title. But what we should have known all along was simple. They most certainly were equipped to handle all that was coming their way.